What's going on, guys? I know it's been a hot minute since I put out a video. I've kind of been trying out a lot of different decks during this format and trying to figure out kind of what to play, because I haven't really been super interested in playing the whole tier 0, tier Ishizu bullshit that's kind of been going around right now. I mean, the deck's fine. I'm just not a huge fan of playing decks that have really high chances of playing into mirror matches a lot, just because I think it gets really repetitive and really boring. And that deck has been seeing way too much representation recently, like something like 70 to 80% at like the majority of major events in the TCG. So because of that, I don't really want to play that deck. So I've been trying out something else to kind of like not necessarily counter it, but something else to at least be able to keep up with the deck and still have like a lot of fun with. And so what I landed on was Despia with Bystials, which I think is a really fun deck to play personally. I think it does a really good job at kind of contesting tiers, and if you have a good enough hand, you can really kind of deal with like a lot of stuff they have to try to mess with you on your turn, although it's a lot more difficult now that they have all the Ishizu stuff, because the bounce back cards are really frustrating to deal with, especially as a Despia player who really pretty much needs to play out of the graveyard. But I'll kind of go into like a lot of like the ideas and thought behind the deck. I've gone through like a lot of different iterations of the deck, and I'll kind of go through like what my opinions are with some of the cards and what are some of the alternatives. All right, so first off, for the Despia cards, we have 3 Aluber, 3 Tragedy, and 1 Adlib. I felt like this ratio was correct. Adlib you can actually recycle a lot easier now with a couple of the new brandy cards, and so one is actually just fine. I think even before when you played Despia, you only played 1 anyway, but even now you can actually recycle this card, which is fantastic. You can either do 2 or 3 Tragedy. I like 3 Tragedy personally because it's an extra body. You can recycle it pretty easily, and I didn't like seeing branded opening as much, so you'll see in this list I actually I kept this at 3 and I bumped down opening to 2. Just because you would see way too many ways to Aluber, or just basically too many normal summons. Speaking of normal summon, we have either one of the best or one of the worst normal summons in the game, depending on the game state. 2 Albaz, and we are playing 1 of the Albion, the Shrouded Dragon, and 1 Cartesia. Cartesia I've been going back and forth on, to be honest. I like it sometimes, like when you have a really bad hand and you brick. It's also a nice light target to send off Branded Fusion because it comes back and gives you more hand advantage. But overall, it's like the worst normal summon of the deck. Either cutting it or swapping it for something else I wouldn't necessarily blame you for. The deck is over 40 cards. It's somewhere around like 42 or 43. So if you want to just cut it down for more consistency or replace it with something else, like another like Allure of Darkness or something like that, you could do that. Next up, we have some of my favorite cards of the format, the Bystials. So we have 2 Lubellion. You could run 3 if you want. I honestly just didn't feel like buying a 3rd one. And I feel like 2 is just fine because you see it just enough. 3 Magnamuts, because this card is pretty much like the best Bystial to draw. 3 Jewess Worm, just because I wanted to see more names. I did switch this to 2 at one point, but I kind of like 3. And then we have 2 Saronir, mostly because in this deck, well, first of all, having the extra name is actually really nice because it adds, or it ups the chance that you'll actually see all 3 names. And also, Saronir is actually a really good target in this deck to either send off Branded Fusion, or whenever he does hit the grave, you actually have a lot of really good targets to send off of his effect in the graveyard. Next up, we have probably one of the more MVPs of the deck, Fenrir. I think that this card is insane. I wasn't convinced on it at first. This used to be a D-shifter in the main for a long time, but I realized that whenever I would D-shifter, it wouldn't necessarily, well, it would end the Tearelements player turn, but it wouldn't give me a whole lot more advantage because they'll just play on my turn. So for example, if they go first and I D-shifter, then well, first of all, I almost never drew D-shifter when they were going first for some reason. But whenever I did, they would just basically set a couple cards and pass. I would set up my board. Usually I can't go for game under D-shifter. And so then on their turn, they're playing again, and it's kind of a pain in the ass. And then if I went first, I would have to play under my own D-shifter, which overall isn't really terrible. But the best thing you're either setting up is either a Mirror Jade that can't use its effect until it's your turn again, or a Masquerade to try to burn for damage, but they're not really activating that many card effects anyway. So like you're kind of leaving yourself open to get super polyed. So it wasn't really my favorite way, and I found that this card just puts a lot of pressure on your opponent no matter what deck they're playing. Whereas with D-shifter, obviously it only hurts certain decks, and the fact that you can search another one in case they out the first one is really insane. However, if this card is a bit out of your price range, one thing I do recommend is Forbidden Droplets, which is actually insane to be saying that. I never thought I would say Droplets as a budget option, but it's been reprinted so many times. I think they're like 20 bucks now. So you can get a playset for like 60 bucks, which does something kind of similar, but Fenrir just adds a lot of offensive pressure against your opponent. rather if you're going first or second. So it's absolutely insane. I strongly recommend this if you can run it. Next up for the branded spells, we have 3 branded fusion, obviously standard, 2 branded red. I see some people playing 1. I like 2 because I like to use it to play around things like Imperm, also play around things like Sulic, and if they don't have their graveyard set up, then like as far as like the bounce backs and stuff like that, the branded red's really nice to be able to push for additional advantage. Like I mentioned earlier, I played 2 branded opening because I felt like 3 was too many, and the effect to save your monster from being popped doesn't really come up that much in this format. And then 1 branded regain because this card's insane. The fact that you can draw a card every time a light or dark is banished is insane, as well as recycle like a lot of your cards. So this is mainly how you're recycling your ad lib. And you can also recycle things like your Fallen of Alabazes, your extra fusion monsters that you're banishing, especially because you are running some cards that will be banishing your own cards. Also, don't forget about the effect to revive Bystials. I always forget about that effect, and I'm pretty sure it's cost me games. Next up for the power spells, 2 super poly. Felt like 3 was breaky. Also, you don't really have a big hand when you're playing this deck, so having like multiple discards is not always an option. Double talents, same thing. I don't like to draw. Every time I run 3 talents, I always see all 3 of them, and I hated doing that. Or I see like 2 of them, and I just prefer to see 1. Whenever you do see the card, it's pretty cracked. And then 1 called by, 1 harpies, 1 foolish. Foolish gets you a lot of cards in this deck now. If the only target was tragedy, I'd probably say cut this. But the fact that you can also search things like Lubellion with this, the main deck Lubellion, hit things like Sarnier to dump a branded card in the graveyard is pretty crazy. Dump in Albion. Albion in this deck is actually pretty wild because you can actually dump Fallen of Alabaz to make your branded red life to play around like other like cards your opponent might have, like Sulic. This card's insane. Being able to tribute a dragon monster to pop a card to your opponent controls is really advantageous, especially when you have things set up like Druid Swarms. You can actually pop like a back row and a monster. Branded Banishment's also insane. This card is super poly, but like 10 times better because it banishes the cards. And you don't have to use cards you control either. So if you bring back an Albion, you can still use your opponent's fusions or your opponent's monsters to make fusion monsters, which is absolutely insane because it banishes them. So against a tier matchup, this card is absolutely essential. And we're also running 1 Branded Retribution because this card is really nice for recycling cards like Branded Banishment, or if they end up popping the beast, you can actually get it back off Retribution. I tried out some different things with this deck. Some honorable mentions are the Mass Change number 2s with Darklaw. I didn't test this too much. I tested it at like 1 tourney. I only saw this card like once or twice. I guess you could bump it up to 3, but that feels a bit bricky. And I was okay. The turn I did see it, or the one time I did see it and it really mattered, was against a tier player. But I fucked up because I actually cited, this is game 2, and I cited out Branded Beast because I was like, it's a bit too slow. His deck was popping off like crazy. He had a lot of crazy things he could do. And so he actually made a Baguska, which made my shit like basically like dead for a while. So that was my fault for citing out the Branded Beast. I still ended up winning that game, but that was my fuck up. But yeah, this is like inconsistent, but it's also nice for like dodging things like imperms as well. But sometimes you just see it too late. And like I said, D-Shifter in the main was one option for a while. I didn't like it. I did also try El Shadal or Shadal Aerials or whatever the full name of the Nesh Shadal Aerial, whatever the hell the name is, in the side deck. That was cute. It was okay. Would I recommend it? Probably not. Now for the extra deck, I'll start off with a card I'm not super convinced on. That's Relinquished Anima. I was put on this because it's a link you can do off Tragedy. And you can take a monster if your opponent plays into the zone. It also makes a branded in red life for your opponent's turn if you happen to draw Tragedy in red and basically like no other cards that you could play with. That only happened maybe once and I was going second. So it didn't matter because their board was already so far established that play didn't matter at all. And if this is like your way to play the game, I honestly am not super convinced on this card. I used to have Wallow in this spot, which honestly I think I would much rather have. Just because it comes up more often where you have a handful of Bystials, and you have specifically Tragedy and Branded in red, or I guess the Trappy 2 Branded Banishment. And even if you have to make that play, you're probably not winning that duel anyway. So this card's kind of insane. The fact that it gives your monsters huge buffs, depending on how big your opponent's graveyard is, and it can steal cards is absolutely crazy. Next up, we have a pretty standard lineup. Double Mirror Jade, double Albion, 1 Lubellion, and then 1 Abolinitis. This is standard. You could run 3 Albions if you wanted to. If I was going to change anything, I might run 1 extra Lubellion. But this, the second one almost never came up. There maybe one time it came up, but for the most part, it doesn't really come up. The Albalanetus is actually really dope because what you can do is off of the Lubellion, you can actually, it ends up being sometimes you have a lot of cards in your banish, especially if you and your opponent are playing Bystials. So what you can actually end up doing is like, if you're like running low on Albazes or whatever, you could actually go Lubellion effect, recycle all of your dragons. So all of your banished Bystials, all of your banished Albazes, all of your, you can even recycle this as well. Make this that can attack like 10 times or 8 times or whatever, it doesn't really matter. The whole point of the fact is that you're recycling all of your cards. So this card helps you recycle all that, plus it's an additional target off of Mirror Jade that you can send to get a different card to search for. That doesn't come up that often, but every once in a while it does. The fact that you can just recycle all your dragons is absolutely insane. Also, a lot of people like to target your main deck Lubellion to banish off the Bystials, so this helps recycle those as well. Next up, Guardian Chimera, absolutely powerhouse of a card. Kind of wish I was running the Frightfur package just because it makes them untargetable. But I tried the Frightfur package at first in this deck. It felt okay. It didn't feel like it was giving me a whole lot of advantage to really, especially like on the first turn. Maybe on the second turn when I'm trying to break boards. But on the first turn, I didn't really feel like it made anything different except for maybe giving like an extra Masquerade or something like that, but that was kind of meh. Speaking of Masquerade, we got 2 Masquerades up in here. We got 1 Quartus. I like the second Masquerade personally because like a lot of the time decks have a lot of trouble having to deal with the first one, especially when you set up your fully established board. And then the fact that you can go into a second one, it really pisses people off, which is really funny. Or you can, if you have the ability to make double Masquerade like really early, it's such an oppressive card that it really helps out a lot. You could honestly cut this for like another Albion or like another Lubellion or whatever your dealer's choice there. I personally like double Masquerade. This was Winda when I was trying the Nail Shadal stuff, and it was Darklaw when I was trying the Mass Change stuff. Next up, we have a whole slew of Super Poly targets. Mud Dragon, this comes up quite a lot actually, so at first I wasn't running this, but after doing some test games against Ishizu, this actually comes up a lot because you can fuse Abyss Dweller plus their stupid ass annoying Rukalos into this before they can pop off the Dweller because you have turn player priority, which is dope. Dweller doesn't hurt this deck that much, but it does make things annoying, and it does make you're probably gonna have to make Mirror Jade that turn, and if you do, that makes the Albion that you send off Mirror Jade dead. Next up is Dragos Tepelia, card's insane. Starving Venom, and then of course Garura. I actually don't go into this that often. You could honestly maybe cut this. It is really nice for decks like you don't expect to see. So like for example, if you go against like, I don't know, like a Cybers deck or something like that, it makes this live pretty often. But just remember that like off the spells and traps, so you can only make level 8 or higher fusions. So for example, off your Banishment or off your Brandon and Red, stuff like that, you're only able to make cards like these. And so like for example, you can't go like Banishment into Garura, which I'm pretty sure I did illegally the first couple times I started playing this deck because I didn't know that you couldn't do that. So that's probably why I don't go into this card as often. It would make Banishment absolutely insane if you can go into this card off Banishment, but since you can't, it's kind of meh. This makes it a Super Poly target. I guess it's kind of nice for Sprite, because then you can put up like their first 2 monsters, Super Poly them into this, and then a lot of times they have to have like some like crazy extenders in order for them to be able to play. One thing that is kind of different about this deck is that you don't really end on the same end board that you used to end on when you used to play just the pure Despia with like Frightfur or Brave Despia or whatever. The end board is actually significantly different. What you want to do here is set up like a lot of follow-up for your opponent to have to deal with. And you can do that just solely off of just like one Aluber, which is kind of cracked. So you just go Aluber, normal summon. Obviously here you're going to search for Branded Fusion, activate the Branded Fusion, and off of that you're going to want to send the Albaz plus the Lubellion. That's going to make your Albion. You're going to go ahead and use your Albion effect to fuse. What you want to do here is actually fuse the Albaz and your Aluber or like any other Despia that you might have in hand, like a Tragedy or something like that, to trigger that to make Masquerade. So you get the Tax Dragonet to start burning your opponent. You're going to go ahead and special summon the Lubellion out of your graveyard by tributing the Albion that you have on the field. You're going to use Lubellion to place a branded spell or trap from a continuous branded spell or trap from your deck face up. You're obviously going to get the Branded Beast here because Branded Beast gives you a disruption on your opponent's turn. And then during your end phase, you can use Albion to search for the Branded Banishment, which just gets you a live Super Poly on your opponent's turn, which is pretty crazy. So now they have to fight through this Masquerade that's going to be burning them every time they try to do something. You get a pop off the Beast. What's nice too is that you can actually use Branded Banishment to bring back your Albion. Use 2 of your opponent's monsters. So for example, let's just say you're using 2 Darks. You make Starving Venom, And then here you can actually use the Branded Beast, Tributing Albion, to pop your opponent's card, and then you get to use Albion Effect Engrave again. You can set like Branded Red or add it to your hand or add Branded Fusion, etc. Just kind of play depending on whatever is going on. And so this is the hand, or this is the field you can make with only solely just one Aluber, which I think is pretty insane. Obviously, if you have cards in hand, you can actually go like Albion into Lubellion, into a Mirror Jade, and extend further if you wanted to. Personally, what ends up happening a lot is I usually like to end on a board like this and then also have like a Branded and Red set or something like that. Just depending on the situation and what cards I have in hand on the field. And usually I'll have like 1 or 2 Bystials in hand. That's kind of usually going to be like enough to stop like a lot of opponents. Because the whole point is basically you're going to burn your opponent a lot with Masquerade during their turn. Then on your turn, you're just going to follow up and just go for the kill. So yeah, the deck has a lot of options and a lot of techs. There's a lot of things you can do as well, like things that I didn't mention in this video. You can add like triple Allure of Darkness. You can add like a 3rd Branded Opening is kind of nice too, but like I said, for me it was a bit bricky. Things like that. I tried like a lot of different stuff, and I don't know, this is more of like what my preference is for the deck, but there's a lot of different things you can do with the deck, and like feel free to definitely play around with it, try different stuff, you know, I know Bloody Mind runs like almost like a 50 card version of this, which is basically all kinds of good stuff like the Pfeiffer package and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of different things you can do with the deck. I think it has a lot of potential, especially it's very volatile too, or not volatile, it's very versatile too. And so like it's not like you're just like playing like the same thing over and over again, or like you're sending the same tier builds over and over again. I think in a tier 0 format, this deck is very refreshing just because of all the options you have. You can try different things week by week and see what you think. So hope you guys like it. Let me know if you guys want me to try anything else. I did try to put together like Drytrons and stuff, but the format's just way too deep into getting rid of Graveyard to be able to actually play that deck right now. Like, I think I might try next is Dinos. I feel like Dinos might have a good shot in this meta just because Misk is a hell of a card. If they want to put it back, sure, that's fine with me. I'll get it again later. And also, like, a lot of the stuff that you're banishing out of the graveyard is banished for cost, so I have to like preemptively hit something or whatever. And then if they don't end up stopping me by the time I get to UCT, then I'm just gonna wipe out your entire board. So good luck with that. But all right, I'll catch you guys later. You guys have a good one.